Okay. Hey everybody, welcome to Blacklining. My name is Mackenzie, and this is our summer 2021. Is it still 2021? Okay, summer 2021 summer release, and we are going to be conducting interviews with some amazing individuals with whom we're going to discuss how they navigate Blackness within their own chosen fields. And today I get the amazing opportunity to speak with Dr. Professor Omari Weeks, who's probably had the most influence of my positive experience is throughout my higher education career thus far, if I go to grad school. So yeah, hi, how are you?
Hello. Doing well. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm hanging in there, all things considered. Do you want to take some time to just tell our audience about yourself, what you're working on, if anything, and what you're about, what you do?
Yeah, I am Dr. Omari Weeks. I'm an assistant professor of English and American Ethnic Studies at Willamette, where Mackenzie just graduated from. So that's awesome. I principally work on African American literature. I'm writing a book on thinking about how race, sexuality, and spirituality are co-constitutive categories and represented in late 20th century and early 21st century African American literature. So I'm working on my book proposal right now and working on some articles that are coming out of that kind of idea.
That's amazing. You sound so professional. You have all of your stuff together. Oh gosh.
I'm sweaty just coming off of the subway.
Oh my gosh. I want to be you when I grow up. Anyway, that's fine. We don't have to talk about that, or we can talk about that later. So I'm going to start our interview off with a question, or a variation of a question that you actually asked me during my thesis presentation. That question being, how has it been for you navigating kind of the exhaustion that comes with the world's hyperfixation on Black trauma, along with all of the other travesties of the past year and a half, in conjunction with the day-to-day rigors of navigating the white norms of academia? It's just all of the culmination of the bad things happening at once.
Yeah, poorly sometimes, to be honest. Part of it is I've never known anything else. This is always what I've wanted to do. I haven't really tried any alternative paths. And so I kind of knew going into this that I'd be quite exhausted, just doing a lot of this work. Some of it is compounded by being at a small English department where I'm the only person who teaches African American literature. And because of that, my work is on late 20th century stuff, but I'm constantly having to kind of teach about slavery and slave narratives. I'm constantly having to teach about the horrors of Jim Crow. And those kinds of things all the time in a way that I didn't anticipate having to always teach these things. Part of the way that I guess I navigated is by taking other kinds of projects outside of academia that make me feel better. So I've been doing a lot of book reviews and other kinds of writing that are about what does it mean to be Black in America, what does it mean to be reading Black literature right now, and doing it in a way that helps to sustain the other stuff that I have to do, which is work in a predominantly white institution, navigate the ways in which that is always trying to both exploit me by keeping me downtrodden and exploit me by giving me extra work to do, right? And so my kind of terrible answer is other kinds of work, I guess. But other work that sustains me, and also just having surrounding myself with people who are doing similar work, who also take it the way that I do. I remember, sorry, these answers are gonna, I hope they aren't too long.
No, not at all.
You get reviewed every 2 years. And I remember my first review at Willamette with the dean, where she was what do you think we could improve? And one of the things I said, I think maybe I should improve is I'm quite irreverent when I talk about like really tragic stuff. Like I make jokes, like I don't take things very seriously. And like, especially at a predominantly white institution, like it's sometimes hard to navigate a fine line between like, you know, doing something that allows me to do this work without like feeling bad all the time. And then also like giving, like white students the opportunity to like think that like, oh, like slavery was like not a big deal. Like, look, the black professor is like, has a smile on his face or whatever. And sometimes that's worked, sometimes it hasn't worked. Um, there's something about like the Lambda students that are like very keen on, not wanting to say the wrong thing. So it's worked more than it hasn't worked. So I guess those are some of the strategies I've used: being irreverent and doing more work.
Being irreverent and doing more work. I guess like a follow-up question for that then would be like, how has kind of like holding a position of authority within academic spaces like changed your, I think, awareness of academia then, especially from the Black perspective, I think, because obviously being a professor is very different than being like a student or like any other kind of like receiving role. So yeah, kind of like dealing with that exhaustion, but also understanding like how has like a different positionality, because like teaching is still something that is like fairly new, like within the past like 5 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, how is that kind of, I wouldn't say warped, but evolved your relationship with academia?
I know there's not like, you're not looking for like a right answer, but like my answer is like it actually helped. The difference between being a grad student and being like a faculty member is actually like extremely serious. Just because like as a graduate student, I think something that like I still kind of deal with is like I'm no longer like the youngest around, but like I'm still pretty young. But as a graduate student, like it's not just that like white faculty and administration treat you a certain way. It's like all faculty and administration treat you a certain way. So like you're in your like mid-20s and they're like treating you like you're like an 8-year-old or like you don't know what you're doing. There's a lot of like arrested development and like, my friends are like having retirement accounts. And so part of what's been good about becoming a faculty member is that like having any authority is like actually quite useful with regard to like how I navigate this space. Because I do have like any authority, which I like don't have that much. I don't have tenure. There are very few like non-tenured people that can like create a solid block of anything. But I do have the ability to kind of like speak up in faculty meetings, speak up with administrators, be involved in particular kinds of initiatives around campus that allow for like not the best changes because we no longer really we don't have a critical mass of like faculty of color who are doing these things. And as much as like allies are great, like there's always a kind of suspicion that we should have with regards to how much we bring allies into the fold. So in that way, it's been a little bit tough, but like I do feel like having any sort of authority within the institution helps with regard to just like figuring out like how to navigate it, and also like within the classroom. It's been quite useful to be able to be like, okay, these are the kinds of conversations that we need to have, right? If it's a conversation that I think is like not going to be fruitful, it's something that I can shut down if I decide that that's what I want to do. And that's not something I was doing in graduate school. Definitely not something I was doing in undergrad where I like spoke not at all, basically. So doing that, being able to kind of like have even like the smallest platform, like we're not even talking about like bronze medal platform, we're talking about like an inch or whatever. It's actually like a little bit useful with regards to just like, oh, like maybe I can't make changes, but at least I can like stand up for myself in ways that are useful. In a way that like you really can't do that much of that in graduate school.
Yeah. So do you find that like the flexibility of your position, even though it is fairly minimal, is still like I guess does it like make it worth it in a sense?
It only makes it work insofar as I have and feel any sort of buy-in with regards to like institutions like academia,
Yeah.
right? Like if I didn't care about academia, I definitely wouldn't do this. And if I didn't care about academia, maybe I would do this, but I definitely wouldn't like try to change much of anything, right? There are faculty members at universities all across the country who like don't do anything, right? Will keep their head down, do their work, not ruffle any feathers, and just like keep going, which is like another way of navigating the institution that like, I don't, you know, I'm not saying that like that's a bad way of being, and I'm not really trying to say that like those people are like terrible people or terrible academics or anything like that, but just like a different kind of orientation around an institution that like, yeah, I'm heavily suspicious of. But in order for it to change in ways that I think are useful, because like I do think academia is like an important institution, one that probably should be broken down and built from the ground up. But until then, there's still other things that we should and can be doing. Having this kind of authority is quite useful. And it's for like students, it's for contingent faculty, right? We don't have that many of those at Willamette, but we have them all around the country. People who are doing this work are in the trenches, paying no money, have no authority, have no ability to kind of like affect the institution in ways that benefit them or students. And it's up to, you know, people like me, people who have tenure, especially, you know, to change an institution that like is going to be around for a while, and as it will continue to work, will have profound effects on like larger society.
I can definitely like say from personal experience that your presence on campus was like so refreshing. Like I honestly don't like if you weren't a part of like Willamette faculty, I don't think I probably would have stayed the entire time. So
that's actually so good to hear.
So like you are making like a difference, and I think just like your presence and the way that you conduct class and is I think so needed and like necessary. And even if it is, again, you feel like, or you are one within like this huge like fishbowl of, you know, very, very white professors and like a very white population just in general across like all demographics on campus, the difference and the impact that you are able to make is like makes leaps and bounds, at least coming from like a student of color who struggled a lot at Willamette. Like your classes were like what like kept me together, and I was just like, okay, this I know that this is worth it. I didn't feel like a lot of the time it was worth it unless like I was with you and maybe like a handful of other professors. So thank you for sticking it out.
Well, also, I mean, like, thank you for saying that, because it's like, what would be the point of me doing any of this work if like there weren't like students like you who are like amazing and awesome and doing like great work? And it's like the last thing I want to do is like have like the Mackenzies of the world be like, well, this shit is like ridiculous. Like I don't want to be here, right? Like so then I'm just like hanging out with a bunch of people who are like boring and like don't have anything interesting to say. I'm just like, what? Like teaching them about slavery? Like what's the point?
What's the point? Yeah, that actually is a really good segue into it. My next question is like imposter syndrome, just like the topic of imposter syndrome in academia, especially coming from the positionality of a person of color, is, I think, fairly standard for most people of color in academia. I have not met a single human being who has not suffered or endured some form of imposter syndrome. So like, have you dealt with imposter syndrome within academia, and like how? No? Oh, wow. Okay. Let me take all of that back.
Can you imagine? Sorry, keep going. Sorry.
No, I haven't actually. I have no idea what you're talking about.
I'm like the smartest person ever.
So just like, how has, like, what was your personal experience like with imposter syndrome within academic spaces, and how did you kind of conquer that, or are still figuring out how to conquer that? Because you've obviously made leaps and bounds, so it didn't like, you still did it and are doing it. However, it still hurts.
Yeah, no, keep that gerund in there. I'm definitely still doing it. Like I said before, I thought I knew I wanted to do this for like a really long time. I like basically decided like my junior year of high school that I wanted to be an English professor. Like not even just like a college professor, like an English professor.
Wow.
And well, it was because like I had this teacher who moonlighted as a professor at the community college across the street. And I just like really wanted to be him, but I knew I didn't want to teach high school. So I wanted to do the like community college teaching stuff. And so I became a Mellon Mays undergraduate fellow. I did like study abroad at Oxford, basically to like make sure that like this is actually what I wanted to do. I know I'm so sorry. It like sounds like bragging, but I really went specifically to Oxford with two of my friends who also want to become English PhDs to be like, okay, is this like really what I want to do? Because like that's like the mecca of like a lot of this kind of work, or that's what I thought when I was 19. So I applied for graduate school, but like didn't know what I wanted to do, and like I was like reading like James Joyce at the time, so I applied to be like an Irish modernist, which like I don't, for those who don't know, just like modernism is like an early 20th century literary movement. James Joyce is like the biggest modernist author of all time, or whatever. The shittiest explanation of that. Also, I can curse, right? Is that like fun?
Well, yeah, that's fine.
And so I won't do it too much. And I got rejected from everywhere. So the next year I applied again, excuse me, and wasn't in school anymore. I could focus on this. I was like at home working a part-time job at the time to dedicate to applications. And I decided I wanted to do African American literature. The thing about that though was like, I really had no basis in it. I hadn't taken a course in African American literature all through college. I had taken, like the last time I had done like really, like I did one graduate course on interracialism my like senior year, where I think we read like Othello and Another Country, like maybe, and like Pudd'nhead Wilson, Mark Twain. And so I went into graduate school in a very good PhD program as an African Americanist with like very little like formal training in it. And part of it was not just like the imposter syndrome of being like, I went to like, I loved where I went to college. I went to Queens College, which is a public commuter school from the CUNY system in New York City, which is where I'm from. I had a great time. I learned a lot. But there was only one person who was teaching African American literature, and I very rarely took that person's courses. So, and I just felt like with people coming in from like Harvard and Yale and Princeton and like all these like accolades and like, just like very, very like, people who I thought were smarter than me. I just like felt lesser than, because like I didn't really know the field I was saying I knew. I was coming from an institution that like wasn't Harvard and whatever. What I ended up needing to do was just like, again, was like surround myself with people who like were like, I was smart, like I'm smart, like I knew I could do it. It just like it took way more work than it would have had I like known my path my even more specific path like earlier. And it was like having people around me who were like still like my best friend from graduate school, who were like, we all like really kept going. We really all like supported each other in like really like both like affective and like, emotional, material ways. Like, let's get together and make sure we like, do all that stuff and like get it together. And that was really the only way. I mean, I still have imposter syndrome, right? Like I will go up for tenure in a couple of years, and like I hope I get tenure, but like because of imposter syndrome, I'm not entirely sure. Every time I send out a piece of writing to be published, I have to have multiple people look at it to make sure that like I literally say this so that this first draft that I'm sending out doesn't make me look like a ridiculous person who like doesn't know how to write. And like because I have those people in my life, like I'm able to better navigate the imposter syndrome that still exists. Otherwise, like I would never get anything done. Right? Like without those people, truly, I would never get anything done. But have people who I like I can share my writing with and like talk very openly with about like, you know, just what I'm going through. You know, I would do nothing. I would have nothing to show for it. At best, I would like go into the classroom and like be fine in the classroom. You know, and also just like hearing other people like have read my work really helps with that too. So I do a lot of public writing as well, and just like knowing other people have read it and have enjoyed it has been super, you know, useful. So like I guess a lot of it's just like external feedback, and also just like external compulsions to just like do more of that work. It's like, you know, it gets me. It feels good to know that other people read my stuff and are like, oh, that was like really good. I can come talk more about it with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Coming from a very similar position, like from an external point as like a student, you were like the most like confident person in the world. It's like really surprising because it just like you know your shit, obviously, and it's it's I don't know, it's weird hearing similarities about just like not being entirely sure about what you want to do or like how you're supposed to make it happen, but also like trusting that you are like good, that it will happen by your own abilities, and kind of like those coexisting at the same time, those very like what if statements of what if I'm not good enough or I'm not qualified, but also understanding like I am qualified and how they coexist and like within one brain and kind of just fight back and forth with each other. It's disorienting, at least in my experience. And I like don't know anything about how to, I don't know, I guess like persevere through that yet. I haven't really figured that out, just in terms of I do get discouraged very easily, or like talk myself out of like just like not trying out of the fear of failure. So how do you like not do that? For lack of a better way to phrase it.
Yeah. I wish I had a great answer for you. Because like I'm actually quite similar. You tell me like, oh, that was bad, like I shut down. Really. If you tell me that like, oh, that wasn't like a good piece of writing, I'm like, oh, well, we gotta put it that way. I gotta start totally over. And I think part of it is like I've gotten slightly better at that because, and this is probably going to be an unsatisfying answer, but it's like I had to see any success before I could like believe in myself. Like I had to have anybody tell me that like my stuff was good before I could like believe in myself. And then when other people tell me that it was bad or whatever, right? Like I still sometimes like get rid of that draft and like totally start over. But also part of it is like, okay, well, like it wasn't bad. It was just like bad for you, you know, like you didn't like this,
Yeah.
right? And that's like fine, right? You know, if you're like, so like when I will send out something and like somebody's like, well, this isn't like, so like I'll pitch something, a piece of writing, and the publisher will be like, well, I don't know that we're into this, right? What I've ended up just like started doing is like sending the same pitch out to somebody else, right? And like the fact that like for those of you starting out, like this is again like not the best advice, but it's like I had to know that like other people have liked my work in the past in order for me to like have the confidence to like continue to do the work and continue to send out that writing. Because it's like, well, okay, like not everything I write is going to be like the best thing I've ever written, right? but like people have like the stuff that I've done before. People have like given me positive feedback, even on things that like they didn't want to publish. So I had to kind of go back into like my reserves of like compliments, right? In order to be able to be like, well, you know, this might actually not have been the right thing for this publication or this kind of editor, right? Like it might have been something that's like the two of us are not gelling together. And like my stuff will like gel with somebody else. Especially if like I believe in writing. There's stuff that like, you know, I would say at this point, the stuff that I, you know, trash and then start over with, the stuff that like I didn't believe in at all. Right. When I was like, oh, actually, I don't, this is kind of like some shit I put together. Or like, this is, you know, like I was just writing a book review for this novel and I didn't like the writing. Right. And I'm waiting to hear back on it. But like, if they tell me like, oh, like this isn't for us, I'm going to start that over. Cause like, I didn't like the book. I didn't end up really liking the thing that I came up with. And partly what I'm asking this editor to do is be like, well, like, is there a kernel of anything here? Right? Like, how can I improve that kernel? Rather than like, I know what I've given you is not going to be publishable, but like, is there anything to salvage out of that? Right? So part of it too is like orienting the way in which you put your stuff out there as a way of like, you know, saving the parts of, you know, what you've done that can be made better. It's kind of about like, you know, I go back and like read old writing, right? I know, I'm sorry, I don't know, your question is like not about writing, but like that's, you know.
That's why we're here.
Yeah. Or it's not that your question's not about writing, but like it's not like specifically about like only writing. But like for me, it's like I know a lot of people can't do this, and like it's taken me a little bit of time to be able to do. Like I go back and read like my favorite pieces of writing that I've done before, and be like, oh no, like you do like you didn't plagiarize that. Like that's like stuff that came out of your head. That's like writing you done. Like you know how to write, so like just keep doing it, keep writing.
Yeah. So I guess like the general takeaway is like one, understanding that no one person is like the authority on whether or not your writing is good.
Yeah.
And also understanding like writing like isn't like an all or nothing experience, and that like if there are aspects of your writing that could be used for something else or could be actually are salvageable or just like not, you know, wrong place, wrong time kind of thing. And so like it isn't just you're a bad writer, this is a bad piece, it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. It's more nuanced than that, obviously. And I think it's like, I guess keeping that in mind when negative feedback comes back, it's not like you're a bad writer or this is bad writing necessarily. It's you have to kind of maintain perspective in light of, you know, kind of the negativity that's kind of coming at you, which is hard but necessary.
It is. I mean, it's similar to like, you know, in class I feel like I constantly talk about like audience, right? But like people write for particular kinds of audiences. So like when you're putting writing out there, it's not only like does the publication have the audience for the writing that you want to do. It's like once you like get into the whole field, right? There's like so many mechanisms between the draft that you have and like it going onto like a website or being printed in something, right? And like at any of those mechanisms, somebody can be like, oh, like, I don't like that. And maybe they'll say like it's not for our audience or something like that, but also it's just like, hey, like you don't know the entirety of your audience. And also like a lot of it seems based upon like your own kind of personal readings of things, right? So it's one of those things that's like my mom is like, you know, when I'm feeling bad, she's like, well, listen, don't be depressed, right? And it's like, okay, that's like not helpful. So like when I say like, oh, you know, and somebody tells you that they don't want your writing, it's like, don't believe that, right? Like it doesn't feel helpful, I guess, like as I'm saying it like out of my mouth, but like that is kind of how I had to respond to some of these things. It's like, just like be like, well, I can't take it. I can't take it to heart every time. Like I just like can't. I know I'm good at it. Maybe this piece of writing isn't for this person. Maybe this piece of writing isn't for anybody. But like I'll write some other stuff. And there's also often going to be like good parts of like the writing. So like keeping drafts of things, keeping like for every piece of writing, I'll have a shadow piece, a shadow file that'll be like scraps or whatever. That's like the scraps have often become other pieces of writing. So I have a level of organization that like I don't usually have, but like it's about as organized as my writing. So I'm glad you're not asking me about process, but that would be a whole other like shit show on that.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll ask you about process, but like on my own time. But yeah, these are all like, I think really good advice on kind of, I think staying grounded and maintaining that like full awareness of like the entire kind of situation when it comes to anything, whether it be getting published or whether just like existing within kind of a really difficult space, whether it be academia or whatever professional field you're in, of just being like, I'm not bad at what I'm doing. It's always like at least for me, the default like narrative in my head is that I'm just like bad and unqualified. And it's not true, because I wouldn't be there if I weren't. And so like remembering like having like an archive of positive reinforcement that you can go back to, but then also realizing that you got yourself into the place where you're in, you got yourself into that position. You're there like for a reason. You wouldn't be there if you know. So I think it's like kind of just like being your own mentor. Even
you also
when
have like real mentors.
I have real mentors. Yeah. Well, that's why you're here. Yeah, also like community is a really big part of it as well. Of like, again, like external feedback, even though you're not supposed to rely on it, it helps. Like, I feel like everybody needs external feedback, at least in some degree, to kind of feel a little bit validated about what they're doing, especially if you're coming from a position where you're kind of, it's a little bit harder for you to get in. So yeah, community is a big one. Honestly, would not have survived Willamette without like Jam and, you know, the four other brown people there.
It's four now?
Yeah,
you
so
guys
like,
are up to four?
No, we're not. I wanted to be a little superfluous. It's like manifesting for the future, for future classes, but it's not four. Yeah. I think moving on to talking about access to opportunities and accessibility, I want to integrate kind of the necessary aspect of anything, any conversation anybody has today, which is talking about COVID, and how COVID has changed everything. And one of the things that it has, I think, illuminated is kind of the normalized and standard ableism within professional spaces, like especially academia. And so I wanted to ask you, how has professing during COVID kind of changed your approach to classroom instruction in order to accommodate and make your teaching style more accessible to like all students, or as accessible as possible?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that, you know, one of the things that I've been thinking about with regards to like how COVID has changed things is that like the only way for me that it has changed things is by making things more accessible. And what I mean by that is like, you know, I teach English courses, I teach literature courses, I teach ethnic studies courses, and like, you know, there are ways in which these courses could work with like me droning on and on about like, what is Latinidad? You know, what was, you know, Executive Order 9066? class, like me giving like facts or whatever, right? In a way that's like totally could be useful, could be not useful, whatever. But you know, my classes are seminar based, they're discussion based. I have zero interest in lecturing very much as I feel like I take up a lot of space in the classroom. Um, I am uninterested in taking up all of this space. And I think the one thing that COVID has been able to do is just like have more people participate in class than before. And by that I mean, you know, I rarely take, well, no, that's not true. Now I do. I rarely take attendance now. I used to take attendance for like fun. I really don't anymore. But you know, I was off in the fall. So I only taught the spring 2020.
2021.
Yeah, spring 2020. When COVID happened in the middle of the semester,
Okay.
We had to pivot. Then I was off in the fall, and I taught the whole semester last spring 2021. And I noticed that there was just like more like attendance, that people were able to come to class more because what being on Zoom allowed is for like people to like not have to come to class while they were sick if they didn't want to. Like I know that students came sick to class on Zoom because like they weren't infecting anybody, but like they still wanted to like at least listen. If they weren't actually actively participating, they were still listening to the conversation. And so, you know, Zoom, I think, has allowed for people, you know, to actually like better integrate college into their lives. Because this is the thing about like a lot of students, well, I admitted in like at most other colleges and universities, that like you all have other shit going on. Some of it being like just like your own shit, of just like wanting to do other things, and some of it is like you also have like part and full-time jobs because like you're working to support your family, your internships, other kinds of stuff that's going on. And like what Zoom allows is for like you to not need to like come into class, and you can like be on your phone if you have one. You can you know, have a different like orientation around the class and the classroom space. I think that's been like super important for just having more people be able to participate. I mean, the other thing is like, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but I definitely feel like I tried to make the readings shorter so that we could spend more time on like smaller chunks of just like stuff, right? Which allows students to, you know, more of the reading in a more in-depth way.
Yeah.
And that's something that I want to continue to kind of integrate into the future when I guess we're going to go back into the classroom. I knew that I taught a hybrid course in the spring where I went into the classroom and there were people in the room and there were people on Zoom. And I knew that I wanted to do that because I wanted to appease both sides. There's plenty of students who like wanted the kind of community that was just bodies in a room, which is like, you know, I work on body, so like that I work on affect and that kind of stuff. So like that's really important to me to be able to accommodate that kind of thinking about like what does it mean to be in a classroom, and then also obviously plenty of people just like wanted to be on Zoom for like other reasons, like not just like COVID-19, not just like health reasons, but just like, you know, I want to stay in bed, right? But I also want to be like a part of the classroom experience. And so I'm hoping that, you know, let's just say mine. I don't want to like give it to you if you don't want. I want my university to be able to still accommodate that kind of like ability for us to be able to like, you know, create other kinds of like classroom experiences and other ways of just like being a part of a classroom experience that will allow people to be able to kind of zoom in, zoom out, and connect, do that kind of stuff. Yeah, I guess that's the main way. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Um, Speaking
Am I
from
droning on? I hope I'm not like droning on.
No, you're not. You're not. Every word is as necessary as possible, and I'm grateful. Thank you. Um, just from personal experience of being in your classroom last semester, I think the flexibility and just the options that you awarded to students to even to like baseline be remote or be in person or like choose if and when they wanted to come in person or not. But also I think, you know, a lot of professors were thought like that was doing the most. Like, like being hybrid and accommodating in that way was the most that they could do. And they were still trying to kind of exercise the expectations of, you know, normal classroom etiquette of just being like, you have to participate, you have to like say this much within, you know, the allotted 60 minutes or 90 minutes that we have for class. Your camera must be on and it must see your face and you must be engaged. And like, people are going through it. And not everybody, I think, has the ability to kind of just like make class their main priority, especially because a lot of the times, like, you know, your classroom participation counts for how much of your grade, but most of your grade goes towards how you're engaging with the material. But then I think it was just kind of like a very unrealistic and kind of like unfair expectation to kind of not award that flexibility kind of like towards your, like all of your requirements for how you expect or don't expect students to kind of engage. And it was frustrating from other professors to kind of like have to kind of pull teeth to be, I think, a little bit empathetic to what their students were going through. And I don't know if I'm like allowed to ask this, but from like a faculty standpoint, was there like any, like, just like, I don't, any way of like kind of trying to advocate for that from professors or like colleagues who weren't affording that leniency with their students?
Yeah. Do you mean like, was the institution trying to normalize particular kinds of policing behaviors?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I guess that's a good way to, a better way to phrase it.
Yeah. No. I wouldn't say there was an institutional one. I would say there was more like an atmospheric one in which like other faculty were kind of like, well, we still have to abide by a particular kind of norm with regards to like what like a university degree is, right? But like there's a certain kind of like rigor that then gets processed through like what's in seats, particular kinds of assignments, particular kinds of attendance policies and stuff like that. I wouldn't say that anybody was like, well, you have to keep 75% of the children's I'm gonna pretend like the institution thinks of your children's cameras on or anything like that. But I did get a sense, just like conversation and like official spaces from other faculty, that like a lot of them wanted to be able to say that like we maintain a particular kind of rigor that then is only imagined in a few particular ways that pretend that like COVID didn't, I wanted to be flexible in like a number of ways. The other thing that I meant to say too was like I wanted to be flexible with assignments because, you know, when I was to this day, like I'm not as much as like I write professionally, like I don't think I'm a creative person in any real way. I'm more of an analytic writer than a creative writer. And because of that, like it just like never dawned on me that like students would want to do anything other than papers. And like this last semester, like I'm giving y'all options of like other ways of doing assignments. So not just like I had to be honest, I was like quite flexible with deadlines. I was like set deadlines. Like I had to end up being quite flexible with them because, you know, the world was falling apart, right? And I mean, even when the world stops falling apart, if it ever does, like climate change, I don't know. I'm going to continue to be that kind of flexible, have that kind of flexibility with regards to deadlines, but also just like the kinds of assignments that you all could do that were like more creative, that were like, I was getting like zines for the first time. I was getting like posters for the first time. I was just like getting art for the first time. It was like the one thing that like, I don't know that I'm supposed to admit that I should admit this, but like, but I feel like I say this every once in a while, that like I hate grading. It has nothing to do with like the quality of anybody's work or anything like that. The best students who are struggling, all that kind of stuff. It's just like, I just like don't like grading as like a thing. I just like get a mental block when I have to grade, which is why often it takes so long for you to get assignments done. Often it's like other things get in the way, but like sometimes it's that too. But like I just like had the best time grading. This is like my favorite semester of grading, to be honest. And part of it has to do with like the letting go of particular ways of thinking about like what does like again like what does academic rigor mean, right? Like it doesn't need to be a 10-page analytical essay. It can be like it's like a bomb ass zine or like poetry or like other ways of just like thinking about like, you know, why would it be the only way that we can think about like, what did I teach? I'll talk about the class I'm teaching in the fall. Like, why would it be the best way to think about slavery? Like the only way to think about slavery is like through the 10-page like analytical essay, right? Toni Morrison didn't feel that way. It's like, why should I make it? And that was like an extremely rigorous way of thinking about what slavery means. Like beloved is like one of the most rigorous ways of thinking about what slavery meant, right? It's like, why should I pigeonhole you all into thinking that like analysis like only has to be routed through like rational essays, that kind of like thinking, right? You all think differently from me. I would, if I was given the opportunity, I would still do an analytical essay every time, right? I went to a friend's baby shower, one of my best friend's baby shower. She asked me to do, because she asked everybody to like do like those blocks for kids. Mm-hmm. And just like draw on these blocks. I didn't do it. Like I refused to do it because like that's how much I hate doing like art, especially visual art, right? But like other people love doing that shit, and like why stop you all from like being able to think critically outside of the confines of what I think is academic rigor?
Yeah, I think that also goes a lot to show, I think, the kind of standards of academia historically and into the present have been based off of like, if you aren't completely depleted by the end of your working on whatever it is it valid? Like, is it worth it? Does it like have meaning or significance? And I think that's also something that was really illuminated within the past year, just being like, the question of whether or not exhaustion is the main signifier of whether or not something has worth. And some people still think it is and others don't. And it was so weird kind of seeing how people took on, I think, that concept of is exhaustion a necessity in order to assign value to whatever it is that you're working on. And there was professors like you who allowed kind of individuality and variety. And when it came to completing assignments and engaging with material, and there were others who were just like, you need to do this 10-page paper as it's always been done. Anything else just doesn't really it's not going to carry the same weight. It's not going to have as much meaning. And I am also one of those people who would prefer to actually write the 10-page paper. But that's just how my brain works. And especially like being at Willamette, like the most ridiculously creative people are there. And kind of seeing people realize that they had the option to kind of act on that creativity and it still have meaning within a academically rigorous example. It doesn't have to be purely analytical in order for it to matter. It was like, really, really like amazing to witness, because that's not something that I've ever really even considered. Like, as someone who does write creatively, like I did a creative writing thesis, I still don't want, my knee-jerk reaction isn't to write like poetry in response to most things. It's like a very personal kind of aid for me, but I would love to write like a 10-page analytical paper, because that's what makes sense in my brain. But not everybody has my brain, and not everyone should have my brain, because I'm a mess. But like, I don't know. I feel like again, when it comes to accessibility, is being able to accommodate for, again, like all forms of thinking. And I think academia as it currently exists resolves around a one-size-fits-all formula that fits mostly like no one for the most part. Like, it doesn't fit the majority of the people involved in academia, who aren't, I guess, the original participants or intended participants of what academia was supposed to look like within a Eurocentric frame of thinking. So yeah, that's on that.
Yeah, totally.
Sorry, I did not mean to ramble. This is your interview. I'm so sorry.
No.
So,
That's great. No, that's totally right.
Yeah. So yay, accessibility within everything. We can work on that. Okay. One of my last questions, which is also going to be a segue of accessibility, which is a little bit of a difference, though, from the rest of our conversation talking about academia. I want to ask a little bit about activism and the current state of activism and how weird it is right now. Just because of like social media, activism has changed very drastically within the last handful of years. I think there's a lot more accessibility when it comes to organizing and, information and resources. But then there's this like avenue for performative activism, which is, I think, becoming more and more rampant over time. And it's becoming like the norm for kind of like heartless, surface level, I want to be an activist for brownie points, but not actually wanting to take the time and do the work and the research to actually make conducive change. So I just wanted to get your hot take on the state of activism in today's day and age.
Yeah, okay. I'm trying to think of like how hot should I make this take?
Spicy.
Well, part of it is like, I think about this a lot. That's like, I forget where I heard it, but there's something like you only need like 3 or to 4% of a critical mass of like a population in order for you to be able to make like particular kinds of structural change. Right? So that like if you have like large masses of people out in the streets talking about like racial justice, right? The way in which the state kind of reads that mass, right, will often be about like suppression, right? Will often be about like violence, but also can be about like a bunch of people really want to fuck shit up. So like let's kind of think about like what they're trying to say, right? At a certain point, you kind of want to be like, okay, the state can't often distance between, or like make a judgment between like those who are doing it for brownie points and those who aren't, right? And so like even those who like are doing it performatively can also be useful, right, for the purposes of like those who like actually want to make a particular kinds of change, right? And that's like not to say that like that's like amazing or great, or like that's so now we just like want a bunch of performative people doing stuff, but like there's something about like if you wanted to do and I'm like a STEM kind of person, so if you wanted to do like a kind of like mathematical kind of thing with like the people who like are really interested in or one, and the people who are being performative about it are like a 0.3, right? The 0.3 still has some sort of use value with regards to like pushing particular kind of activism forward. That being said, right, and this is something that like I think about too, that's like, you know, I wouldn't say that I'm like the most like in the streets kind of guy, right? Like, I do the kinds of activism that I do through both. This is going to sound like a little not like hoity-toity, but like I want to be like a particular kind of like base of knowledge for those who want to be more in the streets than I am. So like that's why I do the work that I do, B, teach the classes that I teach, and C, like really try to have the discussions that I want to have in the classroom. So like, you know, y'all are just like running around being like, well, you know, I'm uninformed about like, you know, past histories of activism, past histories of like, you know, radical work, right? Like thinking about like how you all fit within a kind of like long history of particular kinds of activism is like super important for me. So for me to be like, well, being a performative person or being somebody who's just like not doing all of the work would feel quite ironic. I don't know for me to say that. But I do think that there is a way of thinking about, you know, how there is now I'm going to feel like I'm going to date myself, but like there is like definitely a kind of like Instagram activism. There is a way of thinking about, you know, I think about this with like, you know, that stupid thing of like when a bunch of corporations like blacked out their like Instagrams or whatever, right? Of being like a thing that like was activisty. Of like, okay, but like, what is that doing? Like, who is that for, right? And the question becomes like, you know, is that a question that can actually be answered, right? Like, who is that for, right? It's definitely for them, right? It's for profiteering, right? But like it increases your profits for you to be on like the quote unquote right side of like a particular kind of cultural moment, right? And that shit sucks, right? That's annoying. That's something that's like not doing much of anything, actually. Like that's a zero on me, like, for me anyway. But for me, for those people who like actually do want to do something, but like don't know the right thing to do, and like the right thing to do for them is to do a kind of performative activism. Maybe it's also just like I'm getting older too, but it's like we go do that. I don't know. To do that in a way that like allows you to do better, right? Like don't find that to be the limits of what you can do, but like for some people, it's just like at least fucking do that. Right. I don't know. What can I ask? Like, what is your take on this? Because like, I just feel like for me, it's like I'm at the point where like we're still like we need bodies, right? And like it is easier to persuade the performative body than it is to persuade the non-performative body, right? And so you know, that's the work on the activist, the academic, the whatever kind of person to like bring more people into the fold, right? But at least that person is meeting us like a third of the way, a quarter of the way, right? So again, maybe this is just like me being like an older person. That's like I can no longer begrudge that person. Or I can only begrudge that person insofar as like I still need to like bring that person more into the fold because like that isn't it, right? And like then you're only doing the performative activism to get likes or clicks or whatever, right? Like yeah, I can like, let you go, right? Like you, whatever. Like I just like I can't be actively against you because it's like I don't have the time, like I don't have the patience, and you know, going back to your stuff about the exhaustion, right? Like I don't need my exhaustion, like being mad at you, to be a way of thinking about my own value with regard to like the kinds of activism that I'm doing, right? But at the very least, like if you're doing performative activism, that gives us something to kind of work with or work through. Even if it is like tiring,
yeah. I align with a lot with what you're saying because one, visibility pays off. Like And also we're still in like the baby steps, like the beginning stages of actually making change. Like I think a lot of people aren't aware of just how much we're trying to like get rid of. And I think this is something that Gianna is our like the co-founder and co-editor of Blacklining, is we talk about is like people are like tear it down, but they don't know what they're tearing down, or they don't know what they want to put instead. And so if like you need a little bit of a plan, and there's this aspect of activism for like non-performative activism that kind of condemns people who don't know everything that they're talking about. And there isn't a lot of room for like learning and like getting there and like working through it and figuring out the steps that you need to take. It's like, you know your shit or you don't. And if you don't know what you're talking about, or if you don't have all of the information like off the bat, then you don't have a right to be here. And so there are two very like extreme ends that are kind of barring people from the point. So like, again, they're essentially supposed to be seen as opposites, but they're kind of doing this, like contributing to the same goal of just being like deferring people from the point. So you have performative activism, which is on a corporate level, very much for the sake of revenue. And again, visibility and being on the right side. But then you have kind of this policing aspect to activism that is very exclusionary and doesn't allow people to actually learn and participate in a way that would be more conducive to actually getting people out of the performative activism kind of category and graduating to non-performative or whatever. And I don't think it's like that binary of a dichotomy either. So I think there's a lot more nuance that needs to be had in a lot of the conversations surrounding activism that I don't think people are willing to have, mostly because those conversations are taking place on Twitter, where nuance doesn't exist. I
realized halfway through what you were saying that you were also definitely talking about like Twitter activism.
Yeah.
The most performative thing.
Yeah. And
so it's also go ahead, sorry.
Oh no, it was just like most just like the same thing of just like it's hard to pinpoint what's like conducive when people aren't actually having conversations with each other, like people aren't actually listening, and it's hard to organize and build and create like a very constructive plan for, okay, how are we going to accomplish these things? What exactly are we going to put in their place instead? Now that if we get rid of these like harmful systems, when nobody's actually conversing with each other and they're just like screaming.
Conversating.
Yeah. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
No, I love conversating. I need to make that a real word.
I mean, if it is, I think it's a real word. If you knew what I mean, then it's a real word.
That is how language works, truly.
Yes. So.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And part of it is like, what the one thing that I will disagree with you slightly on is, right, that like you need the plan for what to do next, right? But like part of it is like, yeah, you kind of need some sort of like, vague kind of gesturing, right? So that you know that like what you don't want is like, at least like what you don't want, right? You don't want like authoritarianism. You don't want despotism. You don't want like, getting rid of the university to like put everything on YouTube, right? Like at the very least, you need like those kinds of like broad strokes, right? I don't know that you need like to know exactly what you're fighting for as you fight, because part of what I think, and this is what I like to kind of teach and think about, right, is that like, within the histories of activism, right, it doesn't have to require people to like get along. It doesn't have to require people to like have the exact same vision in order for them to be able to make change, right? But like part of it is like, there's a difference between like what we were talking about before about like performative activism on Twitter, shutting people down for not saying like the right words, right? To say one word out of turn, or one word that's like a little prickly or whatever, and like that's the end of you, like you're done. I think there's a definite use value in like having robust like debate within like the circle of activism that you're a part of, right? That's like, how do you, which isn't about like compromise, but actually about like fine tuning a particular kind of vision, right? So that like once the thing gets raised, R-A-Z-E, you're not doing competing things, right? But like, I think the way to go about things, which is something like I like to do, and I know it's like not the way of talking to other people du jour, is like, okay, we disagree, like what do we disagree upon? Like how do we not move past the disagreement, but like come to some sort of like conclusion at the end of like our discussion that's not about like, well, you don't have my exact politics, like you're Hitler or whatever. Right? Which is like often where Twitter goes. I'm not using that position as much as like how Twitter often goes, right?
Yeah.
So, and I'm not saying that what you were saying is about like, well, everybody just like needs to get on board with like everybody else or whatever. But like, I think the thing about it is like, how do we create different kinds of disagreement, or like more productive kinds of disagreement, right? And allowing that to inform our activism, and allowing that to, excuse me, allowing that to inform how to regress or how to move forward. There's nothing wrong with disagreement. There's nothing wrong with like debate. There's nothing wrong with like conversating, right? It's when the conversating ends before anything productive even occurs. That's the real problem. And I don't have like a solution. I think part of it is like social media will kill us all, but like I think it really is about like, for me, it's like I do filter. No, I'm not gonna say that. I was gonna say I filter my social media, so I'm like only talking to people who like I think will have like good conversations with, but like that's not true. I'm just like a Twitter person. Like in a perfect world, that's how I would. Create a Twitter presence, or fine tune and distill. The people who are just like, I know I really don't want to talk to.
Yeah.
Because of that, right? No, there's plenty of people that I don't want to talk to because like we disagree about things, and I know we can have that discussion about it. And there's plenty of people who I don't want to talk to because I just like know that no kinds of productive conversation can happen with that.
Yes. Yeah. I really liked how you phrased it, productive disagreement, of just being like, you don't have to be like in like harmony, like holding hands and being like, this is our mission statement. Of course not, because like that's not gonna happen, but also it's like a really unrealistic expectation to have. It's not gonna, the entire point isn't to be civil. It's like actually besides the point. Exactly. So kind of prioritizing like that, like unrealistic civility in terms of just being like everybody has to be in agreement isn't functional. And it's besides the point, because not everybody's going to be coming from the same place with the same experiences. Everybody has different needs anyway. So like you need to kind of like butt heads a little bit. And I also like how you said how you don't necessarily like need to know like the ins and outs of like activism to be an activist, because a lot of the like you figure out how to fight and like learn and everything just by kind of doing it. It's kind of like learn as you go. And again, you should be able to have that room to be there and still be in those spaces and still kind of like learn and also contribute what you do know, because you still have something of value. Like you're gonna have something of value to contribute for the most part. So yes. Hopefully. Yeah. That's the goal. So yeah, I'm in agreement about productive disagreement, and how I think necessary that is as an expectation to have, and not kind of I think it's setting yourself up for failure a little bit to just kind of expect all movements need to be based off of kind of like blind cooperation, because that's what we're fighting against. Yeah.
It's like hard. It's like hard work. It's not like I'm saying that like it's easy to like have those kinds of disagreements. It's like way easier to shut somebody down like immediately versus like saying the wrong thing, right?
Yeah.
Which is not me like trying to like talk shit or whatever, but it's like that's like a fact, right? And so using that as a baseline for your politics, right? It really does kind of disparage what is the actually difficult and thorny work of like doing activism, right? The idea that like people organized in the past and like all just like have the same exact thoughts on everything is like not true. It's like just like totally untrue, right? The civil rights movement is not about how everybody agreed with Martin Luther King. Like there was Malcolm X, right? Which is not to say that like they were told like the myth of like them having totally completely antithetical ideas about like what activism means is like blah blah blah. But like it's their disagreements were just as important as their agreement, right? Their ability to kind of like feed off of one another's ideologies, right? And then like often, and like as we've talked about, like come closer and closer together ideologically, kind of through a thinking about like what is the dialectic between those positions, right? That's like tough work. It is really hard work. And I don't think activism should be or need to be difficult, but like it is, right? So like, why try to make it this easy thing if like if you don't totally completely agree with me, we can't do anything.
Exactly.
Which is like also just like not how humanity works.
That's a much bigger, it just like feeds into a bigger conversation about like the state of humankind as we know it, but like nobody has that kind of time. Or maybe they do, but I don't. Okay. I just have one more question for you now. That being, it's a kind of a selfish question, like for me, but it can help others. For those of us, and by of us, I mean students of color who are wildly discouraged about our place within academic fields and don't know where we stand as of whether or not we want to continue. What words of advice would you have for not necessarily like figuring out what that means for yourself, because that's of course a very individualized experience, but just like, I guess, or just like in your experience, how did you kind of overcome those really, really, really hard parts of being an academic student and still continuing through academia right now when academia kind of like doesn't want you all the time?
Yeah. I mean, my advice is, I think the way that I've really had to think about this is that like, as somebody who's like generally anti-institution, just like what I said before about like how I like not that I like academia as an institution, but there's a difference between liking an institution and like being able to recognize the way in which it works within a society and kind of like treating it in a way that's like about like being knowledgeable about it. I guess what I'd say is that like it's like a couple things. First, no institution is for us, right? And part of it is like, how do you make particular kinds of inroads within an institution to make it like bend to your will as best you can, right? And part of that has to do with like what we were talking about earlier, having like mentors of color as much as you can, having like white mentors who are like with it as much as you want, and I'm gonna say something like that, as much as you can like deal with that. I don't know, but maybe not that. It's having like a community of people, right, alongside you that you can commiserate with, like kind of think through like problems with as well, right? That's like this is something that I had to learn really quickly, and by that I mean I didn't learn it quickly, but I wish I had. Is that like it is impossible to do this individually. It is totally completely impossible to like navigate like any institution, or especially an institution like academia, as a person of color, as a person of any other marginalized group, and just like do it on your own, right? that's just like not how institutions work. Institutions work by grinding the individual into something that's like both a husk of itself, and also just like um, becomes something that just like cannot function in any way other than how the institution wants it to function, right? And it's like very good at that. It's like very good at beating down individuals, right? And so the only kind of way to like make any sort of inroads, just for like your own, like both in terms of like changing the institution, but also creating your own space within it, is to do it amongst others, right? I'm a big proponent of that kind of work and doing that kind of thing, because for a very long time, right? I there's like a good like 2-year, 3-year hole in my memory of graduate school in which like I kind of shut myself out from like a lot of people, my mentors, my advisors, my friends. There's like people that I knew, that would really go to bat for me, and I was like a mess. I got nothing done. I was like sad all the time. I did poorly. Like I did no writing. That like I had to like find within myself through others the ability for me to like do the kind of work that I wanted to do. And it was only through that I was able to like navigate an institution that seals the bones of like children who died in the move bombing, right? Like that's the institution that comes from the University of Pennsylvania. And so knowing that like an institution will never be in support of you, knowing that an institution will do everything that it can to like beat you down, right? Having that kind of knowledge and having that knowledge amongst others is just like, I think the only kind of way to do that, to navigate that. The only other, I guess the other way to do it would be just like to not give a but like not giving a for me just like doesn't, it's not conducive to anything. It's just like not productive. With that I just like sit around and eat bonbons or whatever. So building community, I think, is like the real kind of way to do anything, and to find a place within an institution that will like never want you, right? Like it sounds a little like fairy tale-ish or whatever, but like that's really the only way I can think of to do it, precisely because of how institutions work.
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree, just like with my experience, my limited experience with like higher education and kind of oppressive academic systems, it's like they work really, really hard to make you feel like you're alone. I think they benefit most when you feel isolated, in terms of just being like, all right, you get in, you get out, you didn't, contribute anything, blah, 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 blah. I think that's when you're kind of the most, at least in my experience, when I felt the most docile within that kind of environment. And I didn't feel like I even had the right to speak on anything or kind of like stand up for myself or demand better for myself from an institution until I kind of found or like inserted myself into communities or on campus that made me feel like I had solidarity, and with like seeing other people like upperclassmen kind of go to bat for their own rights and to kind of demand better for themselves from the university. I didn't even know that like when I first got to Willamette, that was something that was even allowed. And it's not still, don't get me wrong, like they don't stand for it, but still being like, you still have that right to kind of advocate for yourself to the best of your ability. You have, I think one of the best things I got out of being at Willamette was realizing that I had the right to be a problem, or like it wasn't a problem to be a problem. And kind of that passivity, I think, that I'd relied on like my entire life, especially growing up in like a predominantly white institution, of just being like, look, I need to be as quiet and kind of like invisible as possible in order to not be, you know, kind of like perceived as kind of like this intrusive force, was contributing to kind of like my own oppression or in a way. And again, I'm still unlearning that. Like I still feel really guilty and too visible whenever I do speak up for myself, or kind of been like, hey, like, don't say that to me. Like things that simple. But community makes it better because you feel a little less out of your depth. And like, even if, you know, shit hits the fan, you still have people to kind of help you through it. And you're not alone. And not being alone is something that I think we'll take for granted a lot and forget how much power there is in community and solidarity.
And here's the other thing is like, take their money, steal their shit. Like truly, I mean, part of it is like, you know, don't let them like make you feel like you don't like deserve stuff or whatever, right? That's like how they get you, right? They give you like, I mean, this is like gonna sound like totally like capitalist, blah blah blah, neoliberal, boop 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 or whatever, but like, yeah, make sure you know, take the forks and knives from the dining hall, right? Like orient yourself in a way that's like not of the institution but against it, like in like whatever way you can, because like being of the institution doesn't like often provide you very much, right? Unless it's an institution that you love, but it's like, I don't know. I would love for you to find that institution or whatever. It's like being a rabble rouser, like gets a bad rap or like has a negative connotation, but like in some ways it's like the only kind of way to be in relationship to an institution, right? But like just like being Black, like you automatically are rabble rouser, right? You automatically are like and it's not, sometimes it's often not fair to need to inhabit that positionality, but that is thrust upon you.
Yeah.
But like sometimes it's like not just useful, but like, I mean, it can be cathartic.
Yeah.
And like, why deny yourself of like those kinds of pleasures if like those are pleasures that you actually kind of want, you know?
Yeah. Wise words. Thank you so much for sitting down with me. This was really fun. It was really good talking to you again.
Yeah, you too. Come back. Can you just like pay another $60,000 for another year?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. No sweat.
If I had it, I'd give it to you.
Thanks. No. Well, thank you so much. This was delightful and also very rewarding. I haven't had a constructive conversation with another human being since I've left Willamette. So That's not true. That's not true. I'm being overzealous, but like kind of. Yeah. Any
great to talk to you too.
Yeah. Do you have any final closing arguments, words of wisdom?
Keep at it. I don't know. I'm getting the sense that like those of you who have like just graduated from college are feeling quite placeless in a way. But part of, I think, you know, there can often be utility in placelessness, right? There can often be utility in just like finding one's way. And like, it sounds like a kind of like Robert Frost poem or whatever, like there are two roads, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, I don't know. Don't capitulate to the idea that like you need to know exactly who you are and what you're doing right now. You know, maybe that sounds like a somewhat of a privileged position to like be able to kind of like be able to explore, but like if you have the ability to kind of do some of that work, right? Don't let other people tell you that like what you need to know right now is exactly who you're going to be like 40 years from now. You don't, and you won't. And I hate to use lean in as like a kind of phrase or whatever, but like there is, I think, some value at least in like leaning into placelessness.
Lean into placelessness. I can do that. I can do that. I don't know. I don't have anything else to do, so I can do that. And I will tell all of my friends who are feeling lost and adrift to just, lean into it. Just take it for what it is, as an opportunity as opposed to an identity crisis. Also, identity crises can be opportunities. It's just states of evolution. All right. I think that's
Mackenzie.
all.
Awesome. Okay.
Awesome. Okay. This is so stupid. I hate doing this. Okay.
You're doing good. You're doing good.
I'm a performer. Okay.